It is now my privilege to welcome via satellite Benjamin Netanyahu. He is already Israel's longest-serving leader. And earlier this month, he was elected to serve once again as prime minister, his victory marking what was a remarkable comeback after his ousting a year and a half ago. He's now building his coalition government during a time of global conflict, including Iran's expansion of its nuclear program, which has long said it is the greatest threat to the world. During his time away from office, he wrote a book, Bibi, My Story. It was released earlier this fall, and incoming Prime Minister Netanyahu is now joining us in his first interview with the U.S. media since winning the election. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. I'm not sure it's my first interview, but
oh, goodness.
It's a very important interview.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I had seen some of the interviews you had done, actually, with some religious and evangelical groups. I hadn't seen it with the media. Let's talk, if I could.
Fareed Zakaria is media. Judy Woodruff is a media. What is it? The first one that I gave was with Bill Maher. Is he media or entertainment? He's great. He's great.
Well, we can debate the timing of those, which I think were before you were Prime Minister. But
I'm not yet Prime Minister. I haven't formed a government. Let's not squabble over these things. They're good questions.
There's no reason to squabble, Prime Minister. Help us just to understand this. We are at a time, we had the Secretary of the Treasury here this morning. We've been trying to spend a lot of time trying to understand what is really going on here. We also spent some time with President Zelensky. And actually, that's where I wanted to start the conversation because he effectively asked you straight up from here about whether you could help him with missile air defense systems. He had some teams, I think, lobbying for that from you, and I know you've had a lot of concerns about doing that. He questioned your relationship with President Putin, and I wanted you to respond, if you could, to that.
Well, I'm sure I'll respond to it directly to him, because we had a phone conversation. He called to congratulate me after I won the elections, before I formed the government. And I said, look, I'll get back to you. This is exactly what I said to him. I'll get back to you. We didn't speak about specific things, specific systems or weapons or things of that sort, but about aid, about general aid. And yes, I assume he's thinking about that as well. I said, one of the first things I'll do, not the first, but one of the first things, is to sit down with our military people, our intel people, our foreign policy people, and make a decision. I haven't dealt with it. I did not want to preempt the outgoing prime minister when he sought to negotiate or barter some kind of arrangement between Zelensky and Putin. People approached me. I said, there is one prime minister at a time. Let him do what he can. But I said, on this issue, as well as any other issue that pertains to Ukraine, I'll meet and make a decision. And you can see that I'm being guarded and careful, and I'm fudging the answer.
What's your view of and relationship with President Putin at this point?
Well, it was a very important relationship because it dealt with Israel's vital security interest. Iran has been trying to do two things. One, it's trying to develop a nuclear arsenal, which it openly says it will use to wipe Israel off the map. And by the way, will also threaten America once it develops its other project, which is intercontinental ballistic missiles. So when Iran chants death to Israel, death to America, they mean both. They certainly mean to threaten you with death. And that has to be stopped. But the second thing that Iran was trying to do, and is trying to do all the time, is to build another terror front, in addition to the one that they built with Hezbollah in Lebanon and the one they support with Hamas in Gaza. They want to build a third terror front against us, actually a military front, with 80,000 Shiite militia commanded by Iranian generals on our northern border in Syria. I've made it my point, and I've resolved several years ago in my stints as prime minister, to block them. What do we do? How do we block them? We bomb them continuously. We bomb their forces, their commanders, their weapons, their bases every time. So we prevented them effectively from doing it, but it's an ongoing effort. When we bomb them from the air. We don't bomb them with artillery. Our pilots go into the skies of Syria And there we meet the Soviet, or rather the Russian pilots. That's a slip of the tongue. It's interesting. But I remember as a young soldier, something that I describe in my book, my adventures, if you will, sometimes my brushes with death when I was a younger soldier and then officer in a special unit. But I remember we were fighting the Russians, the Soviet army. Soviet pilots were shot down by Israelis 50 years ago over the skies of Suez. And they shot down Israeli pilots. And the last thing you is a Russian-Israeli war. And so I went to see President Putin in Moscow, and I said, do we want to start such a war? Because I'm absolutely committed to stopping the Iranians. I will not let, at any cost, Iran to establish this front. And I think he understood that I was serious. And as a result, we set a mechanism, a coordinating mechanism that served us well over the years. Our pilots almost smashed into each other several times. We had to recalibrate. I brought the chief of the Air Force, the chief of staff, chief of military intelligence to meet their counterparts in Moscow to prevent this clash, this war, this Israeli-Russian war. And it worked. So you asked me how is that relationship? First of all, it was very important and still very important. Therefore, when Israel looks at the question of our relations with Russia, it has obviously many components. This is a key component. That is preserving Israel's freedom of action over the skies of Syria is a very, very important national security consideration.
And so how do you balance that, though, with what are clearly human rights issues and this war in Ukraine and elsewhere, things that President Putin and the Russians have done? And I appreciate 100% the perspective that you have about the Iran component of this. But is there a balance, or can no balance be struck?
No, there is a balance. There's always a balance. And how do you do this? You do this every day. I mean, this is what leaders do. In general, I would say this: the foreign policies of democracies is a combination of moral principles and expediency or interest. And the primacy, what assumes primacy, interest or values? And the answer is neither. You usually balance the two. You say, well, how can you deal with this or that government? Well, how does President Biden, who's been a close friend, truly a close friend for the last 40 years, and we often agree to disagree. We say we love each other, but we disagree. Fine. But how does President Biden, whom I respect, how does he deal with countries that are not particularly, that do not share America's values? Well, he deals with them. He deals with them in China. He deals with them in the Middle East, not Israel, but other countries. He deals with them elsewhere. He deals with them with Russia too. Where do you balance? Where do you draw the line?
But that's an interesting moral line, right? And you hear critiques about it all the time. Where's the morality of it on one end, and where is the practicality of it on the other? And you just said it.
I'll tell you where I think you draw the line, okay? I'll tell you where you draw the line. In matters that relate to the very existence of countries, and my country every other day is faced with an existential matter, there I go for the existence. Not just security. I'm not talking about anything could be interpreted as existence, this or that security issue. No, when things relate to your very existence, I say that comes first. So, for example, in the book, I describe how I had to face President Obama, whom I respected. I disagreed with, but I respected forcefully on the Iran nuclear deal, which I thought would pave Iran's path with gold, with hundreds of billions of dollars to an effective nuclear arsenal. I had no choice but to go to the American Congress, to a joint session of Congress to which I was invited, and address the American Congress and the American people and the world. And it was a very difficult decision to make. Why did I do that? Because I thought this deal then, as it would now, threatened the very existence of Israel. And you might say, well, there are other considerations. No, there weren't any. I made that decision. When you have existential questions, you have to decide. Here's an existential question in Ukraine. This conflict has long morphed into something else than the tragedy, the horror that we are seeing on our screens.
What do you think it's morphed into?
I think that when it began, people asked me, is it possible that it would deteriorate to tactical nuclear weapons? That's another word for nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons. Would that line that hasn't been crossed for 3/4 of a century, since the inception of these weapons, would that line be crossed? I said no. And I can honestly tell you a year later or so that I think the probability is still low, but I wouldn't rule it out completely. And I'm sure that President Biden and the American government staff that is charged with it has got to be thinking about that alongside the other things that you're mentioning. And does that overcome other things? It depends. I don't know the balance. I have, they make their own judgments, as I'm going to do with my staff. But I think this is an example. This is not to supplant the conversation that I have to have with my people, or the conversation that President Biden assuredly has with his people. But I'm giving you an example on the balance. You asked me, how do you balance this question of values and interest? When the interest is powerful enough.
Right. Let me ask you about Iran, because you actually, you had a particular view.
The bottom line. If it deals with existence, assure existence first.
On the issue of Iran and on that deal, and you aligned yourself with President Trump, who ended that deal, there's an argument to be made we are in no better shape today. Do you agree with that?
No. I think that Iran, without a deal, is an isolated country. Thankfully, it's more isolated now because the whole world, because of the valor, the extraordinary courage of these Iranian women and men, who are literally sacrificing their lives for freedom. People now across a wide spectrum, across many lands, see the true face of this horrible regime. If this regime had this deal, the deal would do the following. The deal would not stop Iran from having nuclear weapons. It would pay them an enormous amount of money by sanctions relief and other things that would give them capabilities to build a huge arsenal, and in addition to foment and export their terrorism and aggression in the Middle East and beyond to every part of the world. The reason it wouldn't stop them is, one, because they cheat, and second, even if they don't cheat, if they just keep the deal lets them basically off the hook with international approval in about 3 years, to enrich uranium as much as they want, unlimited, and that's the critical component of making bombs. From there, as President Obama himself said, once they reach that point, they can break out to nuclear weapons in no time. It's not, it's nothing for them. So the deal actually says, go ahead, move to the threshold of becoming a threshold nuclear state with an international seal of approval and megabucks. And that's crazy. So you ask, well, what's the alternative? I mean, they're moving there anyway, right? Well, first of all, there is no alternative. If you want to stop a rogue nation from becoming a nuclear power, there is no alternative to a credible military option, the threat to use it, and the willingness to use and using it if the threat doesn't work. And I would couple that with crippling economic sanctions. Iran, that has worked, actually. Our outgoing chief of staff said that, previous chief of staff, said that because of the actions, I'm quoting him because I don't want to quote myself. He said, because of the actions that Israel performed over the last decade, we put Iran back a decade. Did we stop it? No, but we delayed it. They would have had a nuclear arsenal long ago if we didn't do so many things.
So how close do you think they are now? And what do you do about that?
Well, I think they're working to be close to a bomb, but they're not close to an arsenal of bombs. And they still have problems. They have, we can argue how long it is. I don't think it's days. I don't think it's months, but it's probably a couple of years. They have to cross certain thresholds. And they will, if they can get away with it. They won't if they think that stiff action will be taken against them. Iran, the only time that Iran completely suspended its program? It was after the Gulf War in 2001, I think, whatever, when they thought that the United States, 2002, I'm off by 2003, okay. They suspended their action because they were sure that after the conquest of Iraq, the United States would turn on Iran and give them an ultimatum, either dismantle your program or suffer the same fate. So in fact, they suspended their program. In fact, they suspended it for a year. After a year, they realized that the Bush administration was not going to do anything to them. It focused on the Middle East, it focused on other things, but it didn't focus on them. And so they went back. The only thing they did was they hid it. They dismantled their military, overtly military program and hid it in fake research organizations, which I describe a raid that I sent the Mossad to the heart of Tehran, and they went into the secret nuclear archive, atomic archive of Iran, hidden in a dilapidated warehouse in the outskirts of Tehran, and they busted the safes. We knew which safes were hiding these things, these fantastically modern safes in this dilapidated warehouse, took out half a ton of material, CDs, files, and so on, right, brought it to Israel. And there we saw how Iran was lying. It said, we're not developing nuclear weapons. There is a fatwa. There, black and white, the Iranian mission, 5 nuclear bombs, Hiroshima-style bombs, 15 kilograms bombs in 2002. That's 20 years ago. So that's where Iran is. You're not going to get them to stop because of this or that fake deal, which just gives them money to cheat you. Right. You're going to make them stop if they think, as they did then, for a short time, that you will take action against them. There is no substitute. And one last thing, because I think this is such a crucial thing, so let me go beyond soundbite mode, okay? Because I think this is serious. If you look at the rogue nations now who sought to develop nuclear weapons, one was Libya, or rather one was Saddam Hussein's Iraq. It was stopped by an Israeli military action against the Osirak reactor. The second was Syria. They tried to develop a nuclear reactor in a place called Deir ez-Zor. It was stopped by Israeli military action. The third was Gaddafi. He was stopped by the threat of American military action, so he dismantled it voluntarily. The fourth is North Korea. North Korea made deals, it signed the NPT, it was a signatory to all these things, and through successive American administrations, they realized there is no danger. So they developed nuclear weapons, and now they're developing the means to deliver it to every city in the United States. Half of Asia is quaking in fear over this anti-economy that is now threatening a good chunk of Asia and Japan and everyone else. That's nothing compared to Iran. Iran is not, if it does not fear a military option, will become 20 or 30 or 40 times the threat that North Korea poses, because it is a theological, ideological regime. Don't let Iran have nuclear weapons. That's one of the reasons I'm coming back to the boggy mess of Israeli politics. It is not a joyful ride.
I want to talk about Israeli politics in just a moment, but I want to talk about actually the politics of the United States for a moment, its relationship with Israel. You had a very good relationship with President Trump. I'm curious about what you think about him now.
Well, first of all, I think about him now, what I thought then, that he did extraordinary things for Israel. I mean, he first of all, he went out of this horrible deal. And I must say, I didn't have to persuade him very hard. I didn't have to persuade him at all. I did show him the stuff we brought out of Tehran, the secret atomic archive. I brought the main findings to the Oval Office, but he didn't need it. He was going to do it anyway. That's one thing that's tremendously important, because I think it set Iran back, contrary to the common view. The second thing that he did was recognize, finally, after 3,000 years, after King David declared Jerusalem as our capital, finally an American president recognized this historical fact, which it defies understanding how people refuse to recognize that. He then moved the American embassy there. He recognized our sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which which successive administrations didn't. So I think he was very, very good to Israel, and I appreciate that deeply.
What do you think about the midterms here, which were in large part a rebuke of former President Trump? And how do you think that politics is going to impact the relationship?
Andrew, I've got to tell you this. I just went through a year of Israeli politics. No, I just went through 3 years of Israeli politics and 4 elections, one of which I lost, and now I won. And so I'm making my second comeback. I've had enough of our politics in order not to enter your politics. I leave that to you.
Let me ask you one other political question about President Trump, who you did align yourself with, though. Former President Trump met with Kanye West last week, who's been making these anti-Semitic remarks repeatedly, also met with a known anti-Semite and white nationalist. What do you think that's about? And what do you think of it?
I think it's just, first of all, I think Kanye West should be condemned for his anti-Semitic rantings, because anti-Semitism challenges the basic idea we have of civilization, that should at least give the equal rights to every human being. And it just says we take a cluster of human beings, we take a group of human beings, Jews, we don't look at them individually. You could like somebody, you can dislike somebody, you can approve, disapprove. You disapprove of the lot. And this is one of the oldest hatreds in history, perhaps the oldest systemic
But what do you think? Here's a politician who you know well, who you think is a friend of Israel, meeting with and spending time with and allowing for this hate to take place. What do you think? You've talked to him, I imagine.
No, I didn't talk to him after.
Not about this, but...
No, I haven't talked to him at all for quite some time. But I can tell you this. I think it was ill-advised. I think it was a mistake. I said so. And I hope, he's probably smart enough, not probably, he is a very smart man. And he probably realizes that this is a problem, to say the least. It was ill-advised, it was wrong.
I want to talk about Saudi Arabia real quick in terms of the relationship between Israel and Saudi and what you think is going to take place during your prime ministership in terms of that relationship.
Andrew, if I had to say what are my goals, I have several, and I'm not going to bore you with the dozen that I've put in my mind, but I have 2 overriding goals. The first one we already talked about. It's to block Iran's nuclear ambitions to become a nuclear power, to threaten the existence of Israel and threaten the security of the world, including America. That's the first. Complementing that is something that comes out, is to increase the circle of peace, but by an order of magnitude. If we could make peace with Saudi Arabia, this would be a quantum leap in the historic Abraham Accords, the 4 peace treaties that I made with President Trump's help between Israel and the Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and the Sudan. Saudi Arabia peace with Saudi Arabia would effectively begin to end the Arab-Israeli conflict, not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but the Arab-Israeli conflict. And that would be a boon to peace. It would be a boon to the world. It would make a huge difference. It already is. We already see the kind of peace that we enacted with the United Arab Emirates. You could see that changing, even economically. The lives of Israelis, the lives of the Emiratis. I mean, the whole thing is different from the cold peace we had before with Egypt and Jordan. So I think that is possible. It's a decision that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will have to make. You can't make it for him, but I will say this. I'll give you an indication of where things might go, depending on him. It is that there's no way that we would have made the 4 historic peace treaties with the Arab states, with the Gulf states first, without Saudi approval. Now, you know that because before the Abraham Accords, we secured freedom of flights over Saudi Arabia. So you have to know, I don't know if your audience knows this, but every day and over time, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have already flown over Saudi Arabia back and forth to the Gulf states. And I think that could be a harbinger of a very good future, very good future.
I want to talk about 2 other issues, and I know we're over time. China, you know President Xi. There's a relationship that you have with President Xi. What do you want that relationship to be? And do you have questions about it, given all of the questions I think that the globe now has about what's taking place in China?
Well, I probably have the same questions that the leaders of the United States and the leaders of Western Europe, everybody else has. I think there are two questions. One, I think what you're trying to focus on is the question of human rights in China and so on. And that's, we already discussed the question of the balancing of values and interest. The world has great economic interest in China. It also has a great strategic interest to ensure world peace and stability. And I would say, rather than answer on China, I met President Xi. I met his predecessor, by the way, Jiang Zemin, a very different personality. When I first came to Beijing, I described this, some people would say, hilarious conversation I had with him. In the book, I describe it. This is an aside, but I want to plug unabashedly my book, so I want to tell you this. He said, I really respect I'll get back to Xi, don't worry. But he said this, he said, I really respect the Jewish people. And I said, well, I really respect the Chinese people. And he said, the Jewish people and the Chinese people are among the oldest civilizations in the world. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I said, but there's a difference. He said, what's the difference? Well, I said, how many Chinese are there? He said at the time, 1 billion something, 1.1 billion. And I said, and how many Jews are there in the world? He said, I asked him, he didn't know. So I said, at the time, a little more than 12 million. And, all the Chinese jaws dropped in the room because that was sort of two suburbs of Beijing. And he asked me, well, how come? If we go back that far. And I said, well, and I also made the however you say it, the impolite reference to the Indians. I said, you and we and the Indians, the oldest civilizations on earth, but you and the Indians kept your country. You had diasporas, but you kept your home country. We lost our country. And so for several thousand years, we're trying to get back to our homeland because in our diaspora, we suffered enormous massacres, expulsions, pogroms, and ultimately the Holocaust. And that's why the thrust of Jewish history has been to come back and reconstitute our national life and our historic homeland. And therefore, the question that I deal with China, and you should deal with China too, is what guarantees not only the existence of my country, the one and only Jewish state that has been reestablished as a miracle of history, what guarantees the future of free societies? And I maintain that there are two guarantors. The first guarantor is a very strong United States of America. Right. Because the nature of nations is not different from the nature of humans. It tends to favor the strong, whether the strong are moral or not. History doesn't choose between moral nations or immoral nations, but it does choose between the strong and the weak. America should be very strong. The second thing is, when I say strong, I mean economically, militarily, and every other way too. But the second thing is, it has to be strong in its belief in the primacy of freedom. That is a value that is worth fighting for, and it's also worth dying for.
Let me ask you a final question, and it's about Israel. And it's about your legacy. And it's about whether you think there's a two-state solution ultimately, whether there's a one-state solution, what you think about the humanitarian and human rights issues that continue to be challenged by this ongoing situation which has just remained unresolved for so long. If we had this conversation a decade from now, what would you want to have happened?
Well, I would like to have a resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but so did my predecessors. For a long time, I was presented as the obstacle to peace. We were about to have peace. We had the tragic assassination, unbelievable assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And had he lived, assuming that he would have won the election against me, I don't think he would have, but it's anyone's guess. The polls would show that I would have won. But had he lived and he won the election, we would have had peace with the Palestinians. No. Well, it didn't turn out to be peace because we had a campaign of terror that the Palestinians adopted when Rabin was alive. But look, after I lost the election, after Rabin's assassination, I won the election, but I was booted out after 3 years. People said, you know, there's an obstacle to peace there. Let the Palestinians, you know, get Netanyahu out of the way. All these boorish right-wingers, always describe that. I'm this strong man, you know, sort of Eastern European strong man who's trying to trample on democracy and so on. All right, you got rid of this guy, the obstacle to peace. Now you got Barak, you got Ehud Olmert. Barak offered them just about everything. Olmert offered them everything, and they wouldn't take it. Why wouldn't they take it? Because just as Shimon Peres tried right after Rabin's assassination, actually, he was the prime minister, none of them got to peace. Why didn't they get to peace with the Palestinians? Because the Palestinians don't want peace.
And does that mean that you don't think that there can ever be peace?
No, I think they can. I think they've suffered from a terrible degradation of leadership. They've been commandeered by leaders who cling and promote this fantasy that Israel will disappear, that they don't have to compromise.
But so what do you have to do on your side to get there? You have this country that has great riches, great growth. You've got security. You've got all of these things.
Yeah, I'm a big free marketeer, so I've probably done more to help the Palestinian economy in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, or elsewhere, more than anyone else. But beyond I don't say that an economic peace is a substitute for a political peace, but I say that a political peace will only be achieved when the Palestinians abandon their continual century-old goal of eliminating the Jewish state before it was born and after it was established. But I think there's a more important route here. If the Palestinians want to sit down and talk peace to me tomorrow, I'll do it. But I think realistically, their politics are so messed up that it's not really going to work. I adopted a different course. People said, unless you solve the Palestinian problem, you're not going to get to peace with the broader Arab world. And the Palestinians, remember, are 1% to 2% of the entire Arab world. But that tail was wagging the dog because they refused to make peace with Israel. They don't want peace with Israel. They want a peace without Israel. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a state instead of Israel. So if we wait for the Palestinians, which we did, we waited for a quarter of a century since the last peace agreement, after Egypt with Anwar Sadat and after Jordan with the late King Hussein. We got no peace. Quarter of a century passed. If we're going to wait for the Palestinians, we'll wait another quarter of a century, maybe another half century. I decided to go directly to the Arab world, and having increased Israel's power in technology, in economy, in enterprise, and having, frankly, increased Israel's power militarily and through military intelligence, cyber, you name it, we became to the Arab countries not an enemy, but an indispensable ally to counter Iran's aggression and to better the lives of their people. And they said it couldn't be done. I remember there was an advertisement when I was a young boy and I visited the United States. There was some, believe it or not, cigarette advertising. They said it couldn't be done. They created some filter cigarette. Well, they said it couldn't be done. They said you could not do peace with the Arab world without making peace with the Palestinians. Well, we did. And we're going to continue. And I will sit down with the Palestinians tomorrow during the broadening of the peace, as I hope with Saudi Arabia and others. But I'm not going to wait for them. If people said it's only going to work inside out from the Palestinians to the Arab world, I say maybe so. Well, I'm not waiting. We'll work outside in too. And by the way, if the Palestinian rejectionists, and that's who they are, they reject the idea of a Jewish state. If the Palestinian rejectionists who call for our disappearance and our annihilation, some of them violently like Hamas, some of them in other ways like the PLO, if they abandon this goal, we'll have peace. It'll be a different kind of peace. It'll be a peace in which Israel controls security. Otherwise, the peace will collapse in 5 minutes. But it will be a good peace for them because they'll control their lives, they'll govern themselves. They won't have control over security under any foreseeable circumstance. I'm telling you that. But I think we could do a lot more. Will it happen? I think there's a greater chance that it will happen under my leadership because I think I have greater credibility to create the broader peace that will ultimately lead to the inner peace, to the immediate peace with the Palestinians. So that's not the long-winded answer. It's actually the shortest route to peace that I can think of, peace with the Palestinians. Remember, we're going to make peace with hundreds of millions of Arabs.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, we want to thank you for the conversation. It may not be the first, but it was the best interview with the U.S. media. Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you again for joining us.
The best interview with the New York Times, and also thank you very kindly for giving me this opportunity to plug my book. If you're looking for a life of purpose, which
I look forward to seeing you in person.
Read the book. No, read the book. I mean it. I think you'll glean insights.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
For the only life worth living, which is a life of purpose.
Okay. Thank you, Prime Minister. See you very soon.